Hello, I'd like to present a paper which has been written jointly with Joanna Wolszczak-Derlacz from the same institution as me, Gdansk University of Technology, which involves the empirical analysis of wage response to global production links. We provide the evidence for workers from 28 European countries. And my name is Aleksandra Parteka. So the main research team is connected to micro-level analysis of labor market consequences of global value chains. And the key question that we pose is whether there is some link between wages of European workers and the degree the industries depend on imported inputs. We propose a set of secondary questions which take into account the heterogeneity of workers according to tasks, to sectors in which they are employed, and the countries in which they work. Finally, we disentangle the effect into inputs that come from high-income countries and those coming from developing countries. So we, of course, relate to a huge bunch of papers that deal with cross-country production sharing. And the key concepts that are related to our research are those related to vertical specialization and the value-added exports. The intensively used Bayard database allowed us to compute measures of involvement into global value chains, but unlike other papers, we have relied on the measure of global input intensity of production that traces back all the backward linkages along the production chain. The second stream of literature to which we refer to is the one that deals with task heterogeneity, so the task approach, that has been mainly adopted to analyze the task content of jobs in different countries, the problem of labor market polarization, the labor market outcomes of trade and offshoring, or the so-called routine-biased technological change. Our contribution is mainly empirical, so we have built a linked wealth industry data set for many European countries. So unlike the other studies that have focused on just a few European countries like Germany, Denmark, United Kingdom, or of course there are studies for the US. So our results are taking into account workers from very different European countries. Concerning the measurement of GVC involvement, we capture foreign intermediates that are needed at any stage of the production of the final product, and not only the last one. We take into account occupational task profile of workers, but with indices that are country specific, so they are not specific to one country only. We deal with manufacturing and non-manufacturing sectors, and finally, we analyze different effects according to the source of inputs. So our sample is constituted of over 1 million of workers from 28 European countries observed along a relatively long time span. The micro-level data comes from EU Silk, which is a European based on hourly earnings and other personal characteristics of workers. And we merge it with our GVC measure, so the global input intensity of production that was proposed by Tima and others. We have prepared a sample of many sector-specific correspondent tables, and we've added additional characteristics into the analysis. So the measurement is based on this GII Index, which measures input intensity of final production, but importantly at all tiers of production. So we can trace back what is going on not only in the last stage of production that's closer to the final demand, but also in the other backward stages of production. And this is quite important if you take into account that huge part of the country's involvement in global value chains is actually dependent on imports that were needed at previous stages of production, not only the last one. Concerning the microdata, we adopt different classifications of workers. The most important one is the one based on the typology of the tasks that they perform. But as I've said before, we rely on country-specific routine task intensity indices that have been developed by Lewandowski and co-authors. We also added with the occupational skill categories of workers, what do they vision according to workers' level of education. So in our empirical strategy, we estimate a Minserian wage model, which is augmented with measures of dependence on foreign inputs. We take into account the interaction between involvement into GVCs and routinization of occupation. And dealing with the problem of endogeneity, we adopt instrumental variables estimations. So this is the structure of the model that we estimate. So on the left-hand side, we have the log of hourly wages of people in different industries performing different jobs. So they have different occupations. We have industry-specific information. We know where they work and at what time. So apart from classic variables that are put into the ministerial model, we put into the model the measure of global input intensity of production and its interaction with the routinization measure. The basic set of results confirms that all the variables that are present in the ministerial model are important, but still there is a negative relationship between GII, so this global input intensity of production, and wages. And this is also true when we account for the level of routinization of the occupation. In the extended specification, when we have the interaction term, not much actually changes. So it means that it's not crucial for the results that we obtain. We have split the sample and the analysis according to the source of imports. So we disentangle the effect, comparing the results on different types of GBC measurement. So we have measures that rely on imports coming only from high-income countries, developing countries, and the rest of the world. And well, based on what economic literature tells us, we should expect major effect when these inputs come from developing countries, and this is indeed true also in our sample. But statistical significance is not everything. Okay? So we have computed quite an extensive economic significance analysis to check whether this effect is actually economically large. And it turns out that when we confront the estimates of our model with the actual data on hourly wages and the developments in global input intensity of production, it turns out that the economic effect is actually quite small if you take into account that this is the cumulative effect over the whole period of time. This effect is a bit bigger if we focus on workers coming from Western Europe, but still it is not large. So these results suggest that, while there is a negative relationship between involvement in GBCs and wages, but the economic significance of this effect is limited. So to conclude, we may say that wages of European workers employed in those industries that have high input intensity of production are indeed lower, and this effect is conditional upon the routinization level of the populations, but economically this effect is not large. If you would like to see the whole analysis with a whole bunch of robustness checks and additional estimations, please have a look at the paper that has been published in the Review of World Economics, or please get in touch. Thank you very much for your attention.